Hi, this is Bird Talk with Terry Rich. It's March 7th at the Foothills Learning Center in Boise, Idaho. And this talk is going to be about the first birds that are coming through in spring migration. It's an exciting time of year for birders because things are starting to move and we're starting to get new birds showing up. So today we're going to talk about waterfowl identification. It's a group of birds that a lot of people start with because they're relatively easy to see when they're sitting out on the water. We're also going to look at shorebirds, although we don't have a lot of shorebirds coming through Boise. There are some species, and we'll look at some of those that might be confused with each other. The other thing we're going to do is take a little bit of a look at some eBird data, their bar chart data in particular, to show you how you can track when species are coming into the area, when they're most common, when they're leaving, and that sort of thing. So if you're curious, you can go to eBird and find out just when scaup are moving through or spotted sandpipers or whatever it is you want to look. So thanks again for watching, and as always, leave some comments and tell us what you like, what you'd like to see, and maybe what you didn't like so much. Thanks. Wow, look at everybody. Thank you all for coming today. It's really nice to see so many cheerful faces, and the sun's shining, and birds are starting to move, and spring migration is probably the most exciting time of year for most birders. You know, we've been looking at feeders and chasing down a few rare birds here and there during the winter months, but when birds start coming back from Mexico and southern United States and South America, for me, that's when it really starts getting exciting. So we're right on the front edge of all that. Before I go into this talk, I see a number of people I haven't seen before. If you're new, would you raise your hand if you've never been here before? Okay, cool, thank you. So I'll give you the real short version. We do this program on the first Wednesday of every month at 9 o'clock. I think starting in April or May, check the calendar, we move it up to 8 o'clock. So I talk for about an hour about some appropriate topic for the season, and then we go out and just bird the area, and you're welcome to join us for as long or as little as you like, or just go home, or you can leave right now if you want to. I mean, it's a free world, and there are no rules really here except to try to have fun and learn and share. If you haven't been here before, I did work as an ornithologist for 37 years for the Bureau of Land Management in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I retired about 4 years ago and went back to school, and I still stay involved in a lot of bird conservation activities and birding. Next month, I'm going to be in Africa, going to Ghana for the first time, West Africa, and Kathy's going to do the talk on birdsong.
You did this to me last year.
Did I?
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy. All right. So as I said, things are starting to move. What I want to talk about today is first just a real quick look at eBird data and how you can use eBird data to see what species are coming through when. Then we'll look at, spend a little bit of time on waterfowl identification. These birds are usually, or are often the first species that people start looking at when they start birding because they're relatively easy to see. They're sitting out on the water or sitting on the shoreline or on a little pond, and you have a chance to look at them, not like a fleeting warbler or a sparrow, which can be a little more challenging. I certainly started with waterfowl. My dad took me in March in southern Wisconsin when the wind was howling and it was freezing, and looking at ducks a mile away on the water. That's where I started. So I always have fun looking at ducks. We'll spend a little bit of time on shorebirds, although we don't have that many shorebirds around here. It's not a great place to look at shorebirds, but there's some we'll look at. And again, looking at sort of what are the identification features that help you tell one species from another. And then, again, at the very end, some sort of news, what's happening, and some ways you can get involved. So I talk about eBird probably every month because it's such an incredible database, and there's so much information there. There's so many different things that you can use eBird for. And I want to look at this bottom thing called bar charts. When you go to bar charts, you get to choose a location. I'm going to pick Idaho, and I'm going to pick the entire region. In other words, the whole state. As you might be able to see here, you can also select counties in Idaho, where you can pick, I think, up to 15 counties. I just did that for another talk I'm preparing. Hotspots, bird conservation regions, and then you can go to some other choices. So there's many ways to choose the geography of what you want to look at. When you do that, then you go and you see the bar charts, and it just shows the number of birds or the relative frequency of occurrence of these species through the year. And if you look at Canada geese, you see they're just here all the time. So that gives you a sense for how these work, and then you get something like where our snow geese. So they're coming through in the spring, and of course they mostly move on north of here in the summer and then come back through in the fall. So that gives you an idea what these do, what these bars show you. But what you can do then is you can go in here and click on up to 5 species at a time, and then you get a graph. So here are, you probably can't read that, here's blue-winged teal, green-winged teal, redhead, lesser scaup, and bufflehead, showing the frequency that they're showing up on people's checklists when you do an eBird checklist and send it in. So so here's about 18%. So 18% of the lists are getting, I guess that's redheads. I can't tell the colors too well from here, but it doesn't really matter. It shows you, though, that these birds, these 5 species are peaking right about the middle of March, and then they drop way off, and then they come back in the fall. So this is the frequency of occurrence on the checklists. You can also just look at abundance, just how many are there, and you can see that we actually get a lot more numbers of these species in the fall than in the spring. You can look at high counts, when you get maybe big flocks moving through, and then there's yet other ways to look at the occurrence of these species over the year. Moving to shorebirds, I'm picking solitary sandpiper, lesser yellowlegs, dunlin, western sandpiper, and short-billed dowitcher. And you can see a generally similar sort of a peak. You get this bump of these shorebirds in late April, and then they go on north because they're almost all nesting north of here, some way north of here up in the tundra, and then coming back through in the fall, getting a peak in actually pretty early in August, middle of August. And finally, looking at 5 landbirds, just picking some that we see around here a lot: common nighthawk, olive-sided flycatcher, western tanager, black-headed grosbeak, and Bullock's oriole. And you see how their peak is a little bit later than the others, here around the middle of May. And of course, they're breeding around here, so they don't drop off with nearly the dramatic decrease that you see in shorebirds and other birds that are just moving through. They're hanging around. We're seeing them in the forests up here. And then another little peak in the fall. So if you look at these all together, you can see why we're keen on waterfowl and shorebirds right now, because their numbers are going to be peaking here shortly, pretty well before all these landbirds come through. So we will look at ducks now, then look at shorebirds, and then look at landbirds, and almost a mirror image then in the fall, where you get landbirds turning around and going back pretty quickly, shorebirds go back quickly, and then waterfowl somewhat later. So this makes it nice. So your birding season is really spread out over a lot of different months, which makes it a lot of fun. So we're going to go just a little bit deeper for people who are maybe interested in data. I'm very interested in data. So the other thing we can do with the bar chart data, right down here where it says download the histogram data, you can actually download tens of thousands of observations, that the data that lay behind these bars that you're looking at in those graphs. And this is as deep as I'm going to go right here, but this is pretty nerdy, but it's pretty cool. So when you download it, you get this really terrific text file that's just a big dump. It looks like an old core dump from the old ASCII days and the mainframe. But don't worry about it, don't even look at it. Just go to Excel and choose Data, Import from Text, and then just accept all the default settings, and it plunks right into your Excel spreadsheet just as pretty as you like. So I'll show you what then you've got. So here's every week of the year across the top, labeled, and here are the species. So if we look at Canada goose, January, this is Idaho, there were 4,570 checklists that had Canada geese reported. And here's the frequency of occurrence right here. So about 30% of all the checklists in Idaho ever turned in have Canada geese on them. I actually thought it would be 100%. But so those are the data you've got here. And then you can look at any week, and you can combine them, and you can average them. In fact, those are the data. That's exactly what we use to produce this bird guide. Because once you get all these data, then you can go and see, okay, what's the most common bird in Boise? And make sure it's in this little condensed guide. And you can go and say, what's the second most common, what's the third most common, all the way down to 400 and some species. So if you like numbers, that's a cool place to go look. And like I said, then what we did for the guide is look at what, in fact, was the most common species reported, and that was not Canada goose, but actually house finch. And that maybe doesn't surprise anybody who knows anything about house finches. So we standardize it and call house finch the most common bird at 1. And then you can compare everything else to house finch to say how common it is. So in this case, mourning dove was second most common, then robin. And look at here, robin, we think there are robins everywhere, but actually only 66% as common as house finches. So it drops off pretty fast. And the reason I wanted to show you these numbers is because you can see where the waterfowl with W and the shorebirds with S's on them rank in commonness. So here we go. We got black-billed magpie. Here's our most common waterfowl, mallard. Not too surprising, although, again, you might think Canada geese was going to be, but they're a little less commonly reported. We'll keep moving down the list here.
You talked about robins.
Yes.
How come most people aren't seeing robins this year where they were just everywhere last year? Is it just simply the snow and the feed available?
You know, robins are very erratic. We were talking about this before we got started. Robins are very erratic from year to year. 2 years ago, I had flocks of 300-400 in my neighborhood. I saw them every day all winter. This year, I haven't seen a robin in 4 months. So I don't know exactly, I don't know where they are, but they do track food. You know, they're very social in the winter, so they're all somewhere together, right? And they'll start trickling back. You said you saw a single robin, so there's one anyway, one in the valley. Who knows where there's a lot of robins somewhere this winter. I used to live in Pocatello, and in Pokie, the robins would go leave the valley and go up the mountains in the winter, just exactly backwards of what you'd think. But around Pocatello, it's just loaded with choke cherries and juniper berries. So they're just going up to where the fruit is. What they're doing around here, I don't know. But it's not unusual. It's very erratic. They're very erratic. All right, so we're moving down. So here's the first shorebird, killdeer. Only 25% as common as house finch, or as commonly reported. Go away. Thank you. And so we can go on down through the list. Again, here's coot, clear down here at 22%. And we see even these waterfowl that we're going to look at, and we're so used to seeing out on the ponds, here they come. They're not very common, again, compared to house finches and robins and things like that. We're down here at 17%, 13%, 12%, 10%.
Terry,
Yes?
those numbers also be related to how many the checklists are at water areas versus, you're covering the whole state of Idaho, so there's a lot of...
Yeah, this is the whole state of Idaho, right? That's why, if you went to the Boise River every day, you're going to have 100% mallards and 100% Canada geese, right? And kingfishers and other things. You're going to see them every single day. But across the whole state and all the places people are going birding, this gives you a sense of how common they are. Yeah.
Wilson Ponds over in Canyon County. I couldn't believe all the different kinds of ducks they have there.
Yeah, Wilson Ponds, that's a favorite destination. CJ Strike, and even the Boise River. If you spend a lot of time in the Boise River, you'll see just about everything when it comes to water birds and waterfowl. And then on down the line, I think this is the last one showing that we love to see hooded mergansers. We'll look at those in a minute out, especially at Hyatt Lakes. They're pretty predictable, but not showing up that often in that many places. Okay, so waterfowl ID. We start with the big one, right? But we know there's another Canada goose-like goose out there, this guy. And I'm going to give everybody a chance to sort of guess what the species are, but we won't draw out the guessing because we'll be here for days doing that. So I'm not going to label these birds right away, so you can kind of test yourself in your mind if you know what this is, and if you want to yell out the answer, go for it. Anybody know what that little guy is? Tiny bill, way shorter neck compared to a regular cackling goose. So when you see these big flocks of geese out in the fields and the golf course, you might want to scan around and see if there's a little one lurking amongst them. But these are highly variable. There are all kinds of subspecies in Canada geese and varieties and all different sizes depending on where you are. So
Do they crossbreed?
there's a lot of crossbreeding, yeah.
So cackling is considered a separate species?
Cackling is still a separate species, yeah. And I haven't heard that they're tending to lump it. But
No, they just split them here 5 or 6 years ago.
yeah. So that's pretty fresh taxonomy. That's probably going to last for a while. Although in the bird world, you never know what they're going to come up with. Now they're looking at DNA. There's a lot of reclassification going on. These used to be 2 different species a long time ago when I was a kid. Snow goose, white morph and blue morph. Used to be called blue goose.
Jared, what's the percentage of blues in the bird life?
Percentage of blues, boy, not 5% maybe? That's a bit of a wild guess. Anybody know for sure?
Say again?
Lower than that? What?
Blue goose, their weight, the numbers are, at least here in Idaho, you don't see that many.
Yeah, that's why I say I think maybe 5% are blue. RL thinks lower than that.
I think it's 5 to me.
Yeah, 1%.
A week ago out of Fort Boise, we ran into a fishing game guy, said about 30,000 of those.
30,000 geese, snow geese out at Fort Boise.
They
Yeah,
were at the inner pond, so you could hardly see them.
yeah.
But,
Yeah, a lot of people make that run out to see those birds. So if you see them on the wing, what do we have here, do you think? Right, so big white birds with black wingtips, although they fly rather differently. If you watch them for a second, you'll be able to tell them apart. But at a distance and up very high, you don't want to just assume they're snow geese or pelicans. Another bird that hides among the snow geese is Ross's goose. And they're obviously quite different in size, and often when you see them flying, I couldn't find a picture, but when they're flying in their V's, check them out. You'll see all these big white goose, and there'll be just a little guy in there, just trying to get by, trying to sneak up to something, I'm sure. But anyway, you get an idea of how different they are. And I found this really cool thing I didn't know. When they're on the wing, so there's Snow and Ross's together, and I just learned this myself, and the face right here is apparently a really good field mark. So I'm eager to check this out next time I've got them both. So you got the snow geese with this sort of continuous face to the bill, and the Rosses, and look at this one. They just look like they're sawed off right there. So like I said, I have not picked this up. I just learned this and putting this talk together, so I'm eager to go out and look at these birds and see if I can see that field mark. Of course, one of the most magnificent birds in the entire world. Don't forget, just because you see these every time you go to Catherine Albertson, and there may be 30 or 40 or 50 or 80 of them, that this is one of the most beautiful birds in the world. And I think you just don't get used to wood ducks. You know, it's kind of a waste of beautiful feathers. I was looking around, and I showed this crate. Anybody know what this is? Mandarin, right? Well, the reason it's kind of interesting to look at, to think about these is because the males are obviously, we would call them unmistakable, but with the females, not so much. So you want to look at females by the off chance that you might pick up a mandarin, and the eye spot that we're so used to seeing, the big teardrop eye spot on the wood duck, is not on the mandarin. And the reason I bring up this weird bird from the other part of the world is this is actually where mandarins have shown up in our region. There's actually there's a pair down in Salt Lake again. I don't know if that's a wild pair or what's going on. They were there last winter, right here right near Ogden. But look, mandarin ducks do show up. So this is one of those birds that if it's a female, you might look right past it. And it could be sitting right on the pond in Ann Morrison, and you're going to look right past it. So, take a moment, look at the female wood ducks and see if you got somebody hiding in there. That's really quite unusual. We've got all these great green-headed ducks. They're not all ducks, technically. Number 1 mallard, northern shoveler with the big bill. Also notice the chestnut side. In the Boise River, often see common mergansers. And once in a while, red-breasted, much more of a saltwater bird. But these are all sort of mallard-like because they have a green head. The females get a lot trickier. Here's a female mallard. Anybody know what that is?
Black duck?
Excellent. Black duck. Now, we're not going to get a lot of black ducks around here, but if you go birding in other parts of the country, especially going south, you might start running into these and just think, well, those are just more mallards. The dark undertail coverts are a good mark if you can see them. And generally a darker, more mottled breast. How about this one? Looks like another mallard, doesn't it? Mottled duck. Again, we don't have them around here, but if you go birding in the east or the south, you might run into these very mallard-like looking birds. This break right here in the plumage between the breast and the neck is a good field mark. And a lighter cheek. And of course, these speculum are often covered, like in this bird, and the color is also unreliable depending on how the sun is hitting them, so you don't want to rely too much on that. And then finally, this bird that can also sneak by as a mallard, actually a gadwall. And we'll look at a few more field marks on these guys. To me, the really soft, sort of almost fawn-like fine streaks on the gadwall and the shape of the head make it stand out even at some distance. And the bill, although these bills vary a lot, it's usually dark in the middle and then sort of orange on the sides. But the bills vary a lot, so I wouldn't bet my life on the bills. Again, gadwalls, these guys kind of can sneak by if you're not paying close attention. The males are pretty distinctive with the white and black in the wings. They have this really, like I said, rounded, sort of softly streaked head.
How big are they?
They're a little smaller than a mallard, a little more compact, but not greatly so, And again, the bill. I mean, you can see even on this one, it doesn't have the real clear orange sides, so be cautious with that field mark. And this guy, do you know that? American widgeon. Pretty distinctive. We do have this bird around. I don't know if there are any this winter.
We had a female at Morrison for a while over the Christmas count, and somebody just reported a male somewhere in the west end here.
Islandwood subdivision is.
Islandwood subdivision has a male.
Yeah, if you go on Islandwood's Lane or whatever it is, it's the first pond you come to.
Okay.
It was there.
So if you want to see this cool Eurasian widgeon, they show up every so often, and they're kind of around. I think if you looked at the eBird data, you see there are a lot of Eurasian widgeons scattered around in any given year, but still pretty rare, so worth a look.
So regarding that, do they actually stay here then? I mean, if they're truly from Eurasia, are they going to stick around?
I don't know if they stick around all year. Have you ever seen them in the breeding season?
We seem to come in the winter when the widgeon flocks gather in the parks and stuff with the Canadas, and then when those leave, they seem to go with them.
Right. So yeah. So they're coming in with the other widgeon and hanging around in the winter and then taking off. I've only seen them in the winter. I know myself in Boise. The females can be pretty hard to tell apart. Again, this break, this sort of light to dark contrast right here, which does not show in the Eurasian. Should be a pretty good field mark according to everything I can read. Now I haven't seen so many of these that I can tell you from firsthand experience that's great. But this seems to be the most reliable field mark, that neck contrast. If you really want to go deep on widgeon, dig out this 2005 article from the American Birding Association in Birding Magazine. And I'll just show you real quick some of the stuff they're doing. So we can look at the median and lesser coverts on the wings, the greater coverts, and then it walks you through the males and the females and all the details of how they're different. I won't wade through that, but if you're really curious, that's a good place to look. And it shows you, especially on these in flight, the female American has this white stripe down the wing, which the female Eurasian does not. So that's a really good field mark if you're thinking about looking at the wings when the birds fly. And that describes that. You know, a lot of these ducks, I think we learn what the Eurasians or the Europeans call the jizz of the bird, you know, the gestalt of the bird. And this is one of those birds that even if it's a mile away on a pond, you can tell it's a pintail because it's got this pintail and also this very elegant, slim sort of build, very distinctive shape. And even the female, with sort of a long neck, that distinctive bill, almost like a canvasback type bill on the head, and then the long neck. And I thought, just for fun, it's like, why call it a northern pintail? There must be another pintail somewhere, right? Ah, yes, indeed, there is. So there's a white cheek pintail, which I've seen in Brazil, actually, but they're pretty widespread in South America, as you can see. Fun fact.
We saw a mallard pintail cross a couple weeks ago.
Mallard pintail hybrid.
Male,
yeah, a male.
It's just, they were just going,
Did you get a picture of it?
Yeah.
What's it look like?
weird.
It looks weird.
It had the white line that goes up the neck was only about halfway up,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So it had the white line on the neck,
yeah,
but not so high.
not all the way up.
White butt.
Yeah, the white butt.
And it had the white butt.
But it had a green head, and it had kind of a halfway length tail that kind of turned up,
Yeah.
but it was way longer than a...
So a hybrid tail as well. Yeah, I think mallards have hybridized with just about anything that swims. So if you start looking at the hybrids, they cross with everything.
You see a lot of hybrids and you'll see strays. Valid hybrids.
Yes, a lot of birds.
So here's another bird we don't see all that often around here, blue-winged teal. And two other teal. And I suppose pretty much everybody knows what they are, right? What's this guy? Green-winged teal. And again, we might say these are, as males, are pretty much unmistakable. I don't know what you would confuse any of these three with as far when the males are in breeding plumage. When you move over to the females, though, then you've got maybe a little bit more of a puzzle. Or when the males are in non-breeding plumage and they look like females pretty much. So this, again, is something I've not used a lot. I need to practice a little bit because I don't see a lot of these birds. If you can get them out of the water, you can see heavy spotting under the tail on the blue wing as compared to the others. And this is a field mark I was not aware of, but I'm really eager to use it. On the green-winged teal female, this break between the sides and the white under tail coverts here, supposedly a good field mark shows up even at some distance. Anybody use that on these birds? It looks like no. So when you're looking at female teal, check that out. See if that should be pretty good from everything I read. Yes?
The size.
Yeah.
Pardon?
The size. That green-winged teal is very small.
Green-winged teal is very small. Yep.
Last week I was
I think it's a small.
a lot of American widgeons, and there was this tiny little female duck, and I said to myself, it's got to be a green-winged.
Got to be a green-winged
It was
teal.
so tiny.
Right.
And sure enough, I'm watching it paired up.
So that's the smallest, I believe that's our smallest duck, right? Also no split eye-ring, whereas the bluewing has a split. In other words, it doesn't go all the way around. It's just over the top and under the bottom, like a McGillivray's warbler, if you know that bird. And then the cinnamon teal, even the female, plainer face, doesn't have this eye line and all the markings. And also generally some of that cinnamon-y color, excuse me, that richness shows through even on the female. Again, if you want to go deep, this just came out, came in my mailbox a couple days ago, an article on blue-wing teal where they compare blue-wing, green-wing, and cinnamon in excruciating detail. So if you, it's only 3 pages and several pictures. So if you get bird watching magazine, you can learn everything there is to know about identifying teal. I well remember these 2 birds floating on a pond in southern Wisconsin way back in the late 50s, probably. God, that's starting to sound like a long time ago. And my dad showing me that you could always tell a redhead from a canvasback because of the profile of that canvasback's head and bill. The other thing that's pretty obvious, even at some distance, is the color of the feathers where they hit the water, with the canvasback being quite bright, white, and the redhead being more grayish. But this head profile is really, you can see it forever, and even in silhouette it shows up very nicely. Yeah, like a trumpeter. 2 other ducks that are sometimes confused, but probably really shouldn't be. The ringneck duck, which I think is absolutely one of the most beautiful ducks we have, really spectacular. We get them on this little pond over here once in a while, and lesser scaup. The should be called the ring-billed duck, of course. Everybody, I think, agrees on that, because the ring neck you can't see unless you shoot the bird and hold it by its head. Then you can see this brown ring on this poor dead bird. So we won't worry about that, but the bills are pretty different. The back sort of mottled and almost zebra stripe, very fine streaking on the lesser scaup as compared to solid. And I think even the best field mark of all is this head shape of the ringneck duck. It's got this sort of point almost on the back of the head. Again, in a silhouette, even at a great distance on a pond, these guys just look very different from scaup or anything else for that matter. Yes?
Okay, if you look at the 2 ducks there, see the back, see how on the lesser scaup, that line between the lower flanks and the back there kind of comes across in a more or less straight line. If you look at that ringneck duck, see how it makes that kind of little swoopy thing down through there, and that's really helpful when you get females.
You're talking about here or here?
Both,
The whole thing.
Oh, I see, the whole thing.
Contrast.
I see. Yeah, so
when
there's...
you get the females, you can tell where they look almost alike. That's how I tell the difference, is that the way those back feathers course along there.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I hadn't realized how different that is. Great. I got to go out and look at these ducks again. So does it work on these?
Yeah, that's the ones I'm talking about especially. See, if you look at the lesser scaup to the right, see that line, the 2 different colors between the back and the side?
Right here.
Yeah. See,
So the line between...
no lower down.
Right here?
Yeah, right there.
So
see
the...
how it goes almost straight?
Ah.
If you look at the female ringneck over there, see, she's got that little, what I call scalloping that goes back up.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so the side, the pattern along the side straight on the lesser scaup and
Curved.
scallopy on the ringneck duck, showing up at great distance. Cool. Thanks for that. I didn't know that.
The eye ring on the female, I think it's a big one too.
You think the eye ring is...
On that ringneck duck.
You think that's good?
Yeah.
The eye ring is a good solid field mark on the female.
That's just not doesn't happen.
Right. Darker head, which may not show up under, of course, in some light, and a little bit different shape again that it doesn't show up particularly well in this bird, but again, that sort of knot on the back of the head.
Can you go back to the males for a second?
Yes, the males.
Okay. I'm done.
Okay. All right, where are we? Okay, 2 golden eyes. Usually pretty easy to tell if you can get a good look, right? Different shaped spot. But I think even another field mark that shows up really well, even at a distance, is the amount of white that it'll show on the sides. So the barrel's dark through here and the common light through here. So if the head's tucked or it's turned or it's far away, you might be able to see that pattern on the side a lot more easily. The females, generally pretty similar. I've not really practiced this because I don't see that many barrows and commons together. More of a sloped forehead on the common goldeneye. Anybody use that? I guess that's it. Okay.
I use the bill
colors often.
Yeah, you know, some of the field guides were talking about the bill color, but
Variable.
it varies a lot. And I was just looking at photos in the field guides and on the internet, and there's a lot of variation in those bills. So I don't trust those too much.
The head shape is different too.
Yeah.
The forehead and the
So again, you get kind of a canvas back slope here and more of a abrupt vertical forehead on the barrows.
kind of puffy looking
That
head.
should show up. That should show up again very well in silhouette and bad light and everything else. All right. Some of our favorite birds. I never get tired of seeing mergansers. Of course, these guys,
Really bad hair day.
bad hair day, love the dew on the red-breasteds. And of course, they have the red breast. And they're somewhat smaller than the commons. I think that's your field mark you like, as I recall, Kathy. The size, I never really thought about the size. Also, again, the color of the bird against the water. So pure white here and grayish on red-breasteds, males. Females, maintaining the crazy look on the female red-breasted. And on the common, this nice white chin spot and quite a bit of contrast. Bang, right there. 2 birds that are also sometimes confused. People just start looking at this bird with white on the side of the head, bufflehead, and yet another merganser, pretty small compared to the other mergansers. And you can see the white, if you're just thinking about white on the head, maybe they look pretty similar. When this guy doesn't have his crest erected, of course, then he's quite spectacular looking. But the bills are really different. Look at how narrow and pointy that bill is on the hooded merganser compared to the bufflehead. Another field mark that will show up at some distance and in bad light and everything else. And you also have, again, the color of the bird against the water. So white on the bufflehead, dark or brown on the hooded merganser.
Are their diving habitats different, or diving?
Are there diving? I don't know if they split by habitat. Much.
Dabbling versus diving duck. I don't know. I'm asking.
No, they're both divers, and they're both together at Hyatt Lakes. That's where I see them. But I don't have a lot of familiarity. I'm not sure. You were saying they split up by.
Yeah, the buffleheads tend to like bigger open water, and the hooded mergansers tend to do smaller waters. And these are generalizations.
Yeah.
But kind of wooded.
More wooded for the
smaller,
hooded merganser.
Yeah, kind of water. Whereas buffleheads, you'll often see them out on big
Big lakes and big bays.
Water.
Right. All right, just a few more. Again, one of the more distinct ducks out on the water because they're so small. And this tail, also called stiff-tailed ducks. Relatively big bill for the size of the head and the body. And then just a quick look at, it's fun to see, if you go through, I've got all these waterfowl books from the old days and field guides, and everybody's got all kinds of plates of these birds flying when we often see them flying, comparing one to the other, so you can kind of peruse around, look at wings and look at silhouettes and so on of flying birds. So just a few more waterfowl that are not ducks per se. Pied-bill grebe, one of the smallest birds out there in the water floating around with the ducks. Birds I don't see very often unless I get over into the big lakes in Oregon or maybe down to Salt Lake, eared grebes. Again, I would say unmistakable in breeding plumage. Horn grebes, I rarely see horn grebes. Anybody see any horn grebes around here ever anywhere?
Not very often.
CJ, are they reliable there or just sometimes? CJ strike?
They're hit or miss. They move around on there a little bit, so sometimes you can find them in the big pool behind the dam, and sometimes you have to go all the way up to Jack's Creek.
Okay, sometimes around the dam and sometimes up to Jack's Creek. Okay, so again, breeding pretty spectacular. In winter, though they can look pretty similar. This is a field mark I've not used, Ariel. I don't know if you like this or not, but this spot, this light spot by the bill is supposed to be very good for horned grebe in winter, non-breeding plumage.
If you get them that close.
Yeah.
I just usually use the whiteness of the cheek.
The whiteness of the cheek, right. So here we can see on the eared grebe a rather dark color coming down over the cheek fairly low, and then on the horned, not so low and more of a sharp line across the face.
I consider ear grebes in between the two kind of dirty looking, like they need to wash their head a little bit or something.
Okay, so the eared grebe's kind of dirty looking, and the horned grebe has a nice crisp white-black contrast on the head. So that's good. I like that one. The head shape is supposedly a little different again. I don't have enough experience to know if that's real good or not.
What's the breed? Oh, that's the western breed. Okay, that's the one that's a Cascade, I think.
Yeah. And then, of course, you get into the big guys, Western and Clark's, very similar. Remember when these guys were teased apart 30 or 40 years ago? I think actually working down on Salt Lake, they started looking at these birds and going, wait a minute, there's two species here. So the white above the eye in Clark's grebe, and then dark coming over the eye in Westerns.
Some folks say, okay, on those two grebes there, that area just right around the eye will go in the winter between both of them will get a salt and peppery look.
So they become indistinguishable.
So if you can't, if you're not sure, look at that bill. The Clark's grebe is always going to be yellowish orangey, and the Western is always going to be, to me it looks thinner and a little more delicate, but it's always going to be kind of greenish yellow.
So the bill color being a good field mark, Clark's being bright yellowy orange, and Western again maybe a little darker or dirtier.
And grebes are most often seen at Deer Flat. Yes.
No, you get tons of them in all the reservoirs. A couple falls ago, we had several hundred at American Falls Reservoir.
But in this area, Deer
Oh,
Flat.
CJ, Deer Flat, any of the big lakes, even some of Bennett out there at Black's Creek, there'll be a few come in occasionally. Indian Creek.
Cascade is great.
Mountain Hall.
Cascade, yeah. So basically, if you want to see these big grebes, go to the bigger reservoirs, big flat water, and scan around. And again, they're big enough and distinctive enough you can see them a long way off and figure out what they are. So, yes.
Their dancing should be starting about now.
That's true.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen, go on YouTube and look up Western grebe or Clark grebe breeding behavior, breeding displays, dancing, and look at the videos of what these birds do on the water. It's bizarre and amazing. Definitely worth the look. So a few more water birds that are not ducks and not grebes and mud hen. Greatly disrespected American coot. And if you're lucky, you might get a close relative in the American coot, this bird right here, common gallinule. So again, don't just say, oh, there's 1,000 coots and drive on down the road. You might want to take a quick peek through there and be looking for the tail, the white tail, this line on the side, this white line down the side, and maybe this shield, but again, with these bills, I don't trust the colors. They can be red, orange, white, yellow. And when you get into South America, where there's maybe 5 similar species of coots, and you think you can tell them all apart, and you'll see all kinds of variation in that shield color. So again, I wouldn't rely on that, but with these other field marks, if you get a gallinule, you probably know it.
Gallinule
Yeah.
swim?
Yeah.
We're just waders.
No, they swim. Yeah. I mean, they like to poke around the marsh more like a wader, but yeah, these birds certainly can swim.
And they're a little smaller than.
The gallinule is a little smaller than the coot.
Yeah, way smaller and browner.
Browner. Okay, yeah, you can see even in this picture quite a bit more brown in the back. I hadn't even thought of that one. Just quickly, I just throw these guys on there because sometimes you'll see this bird way out on the water, kind of swimming kind of low with its head up, and you may not know for sure, except the way they hold their heads. I think the cormorant's always got the bill up, and the loon will have the bill flat or down a little bit. Otherwise, they can look quite similar, especially because these guys can kind of float high in the water or kind of go down in the water, and sometimes you can't really tell what you're looking at, but you can see that bill angle. Good field mark. All right. We just have a few more minutes, so we're going to quickly go through relatively few shorebirds that we have around here. As you may recall, the killdeer is the most common shorebird we have, still only like 25% as common as a house finch, for whatever usefulness that comparison might actually make. I haven't heard one yet this spring, but I have heard starlings starting to do killdeer, so the starling is hearing them, I think. Barber Park has a killdeer? Yeah. Yay. All right. So other birds that sort of might sneak by as a killdeer if you don't pay close attention. Of course, these guys only have a single band, and when you get on the golf course where you've got a lot of these plover running around, this just absolutely honking bill on this thing compared to its body. So the Wilson's is usually, for me, is the easiest shorebird to pick out of a whole bunch of shorebirds I can't identify. And then semi-palmated, also with a single band, and this really cool bicolored bill, and this sort of weird band over the head. So that's pretty different looking. Also, I think the legs. It's one thing you always want to look at on shorebirds is check the legs, because there's green legs and orange legs and yellow legs.
And dirty legs.
Dirty legs, yeah. So get the leg color if you can, and that may help a lot. Spotted sandpipers, really widespread, and one of my favorites because they're on our rivers way up in the mountains in the spring, and they're on canals, and they're kind of maybe the more common even than killdeer in a lot of ways, a lot more habitats. You see them camping up in the forests in the summer, and the bird that's sort of vaguely similar, solitary sandpiper, but the light spots on a dark back are good field mark for solitaries. Yeah.
Most of the spotted sandpiper looks like that solitary sandpiper, but the behavior is very different because that one is a butt bobber.
Yeah, bobbing, a butt bobber. Butt bobber, that's right. Yeah, always, seems like they burn up so much energy doing that. It makes me weary to watch them. Yeah, so spotties are bobbing all the time. They got a very distinctive call as well on the Kathy Oak cover next month. Just kidding, I don't have any shorebirds in there.
That would be easier.
And then, of course, big spots on this guy versus maybe a little bit of modeling on that one. These guys, of course, are very, again, I would say, unmistakable. Black-necked stilt and American avocet. And again, these birds, if you get over into the big inland lakes over in Oregon and Nevada, you start running into a lot, in the brackish water, you start running into a lot bigger numbers of these two shorebirds. Wilson's phalarope, just one of those birds that's out there that you might wonder what it is because it's swimming around like a duck, but very distinctive shape, long narrow bill, and these guys have also a very interesting habit when they forage. A lot of times they spin in the water to stir up whatever it is they're eating. And again, you might go on YouTube and look at phalarope spinning or something like that. There's 3 species of phalarope. I think they all do that, but these guys for sure. They would look like they're crazy, you know. They got a screw loose out there. But
Shovelers do that as well, don't they?
Shovelers spin. You know, I haven't. Not sure I really seen. Yeah.
That's the only place I've seen them do it.
Shovelers are spinners too.
Green-winged teal do something similar.
Green-winged teal spin as well. I didn't know that. Thank you. Cool. All right, a couple more. Wilson snipe, white stripes on the back, and short-billed dowitcher. generally kind of chunky, generally similar. Although again, I think behavior is another good one. You'll see these snipe very frequently sitting on fence posts and signs, and I'm not sure I've ever seen a dowitcher do that.
But they have that football shape.
Football shape?
Yeah.
Both of them? Yeah.
You go back.
A couple of the little sandpipers, and these can be really, really fun puzzles when you're like on the Gulf Coast in the winter and you've got maybe tens of thousands of various kinds of small shorebirds running around, all mixed together. It's really a great training ground to distinguish these birds. Western sandpiper is kind of famous among these so-called peeps for having a relatively large and slightly downturned bill. So that's really reliable. It shows up really well at a distance. And you can pick these guys out from semi-palms and some of the other small shorebirds we call peeps. So that's all I have for shorebirds and waterbirds and a little bit of eBird data. And I'm going to wrap that up there for the purposes of our recording. All right. Thank you. Thank you.